That evening, I got home a little later than I had hoped. I had to attend a meeting. I didn't really feel like being there. The two people I was mediating with were, quite frankly, not very nice. Both were interested in causing as much pain as possible to the other person. They weren't interested in resolving the situation, they were interested in the damage. I could understand why. From a business standpoint, the situation was a disaster, but my job was to find a middle ground so that both parties could walk away feeling like they got what they wanted. This is virtually impossible in situations where one or both parties were more interested in hurting the other than resolving the situation. Or worse, where the very act of resolving the situation actually hurt. No one walks away from such a situation satisfied, I can tell you that for sure. More than once, I have had to admit defeat and simply tell both parties that lawyers will have to be involved at this point, because only resentment toward the other person will help resolve the situation. At least in situations where both parties are trying to hurt each other out of blind rage and resentment, there is a chance that one or the other will come to their senses. And that's where I come in. I think it's customary to introduce ourselves. My name is Mike Absalom. I work as a mediator, and a good mediator, if I may say so, for a company that law firms hire as arbitrators. More often than not, our work is woven into contracts. If a contract breaks down, instead of running to lawyers, two parties, or three, and sometimes four, come to us. We sit down, try to understand the situation, figure out what each of them wants, and try to come to an agreement. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. What we do is not legally binding. We make an agreement in spirit, not in law. Sometimes what we do takes the form of a contract, but mostly it's a way of getting people to come together and find solutions to their problems. Less about the letter of the law and more about the spirit of the law, sort of. So yeah, that's what I do. I've always done it in one form or another, and I have a particular way of working. I come from a large family, 6 kids, 5 boys, and 1 girl. I was the second oldest and seemed to be constantly mediating disagreements. My mom was a single mom. Our dad died 2 days after Benji, the youngest, was born. He was killed by a drunk driver crossing the road after buying flowers for my mom. She never got over it, but she dove headfirst into taking care of us. She did what she could, but the reality was that even with 2 parents, providing a roof, clothes, food, and attention equally for all 6 of us would have been difficult, let alone one parent. She had her own business, she sold real estate, and we were what our generation called errand kids. We would come home, make a snack, watch TV, annoy each other, and somehow I always found myself in the role of the in-between. Mediation is an interesting profession. I didn't set out to choose this profession, it just happened. At first, I worked in a factory in the shop making metal parts for all sorts of things. Golf carts, ballpoint pens, whatever. If they had little bits of metal in them, we made parts for them. In short, I was the voice of reason in many matters and settled them when necessary. I have no idea why I was chosen. Perhaps I was the most reasonable. Anyway, I was working in a metal shop. In college when I took a creative writing course. Yes, I have no idea what I was thinking either. And there was a dispute between management and the workers. Some of us were union members, some of us weren't. I wasn't, but somehow I ended up representing the workers. We had a union rep, and he would sometimes show up, but half the time when management wanted to talk to the workers, he was nowhere to be found. Part of me still thinks management, did it on purpose. In any case, I did a lot of negotiating, and while I think management had a bearish attitude, we managed to agree on something. 4 months later, it happened again. Same thing, demanding no vacation in August because a big order was coming in or something like that. Anyway, this time they brought in an arbitration company, which basically did the same thing I did, only without the bias, as management put it. It didn't really matter. The arbitration company ended up talking to me and the union rep anyway, and then just referred the matter to management. All they did was act as a mediator. We avoided trouble, as management put it, and everyone got something out of it. I know what I got. I got a job offer from an arbitration company. So in college, I changed my major to business studies and psychology and went to work for them. It made my hands lighter, that's for sure. I graduated from college 2 years later and have been working as a mediator ever since. And believe me, I've had to mediate some of the strangest cases. Movie companies and actors' agents, car companies and their employees, attorneys who are partners, even a group of surfing contestants and the company that organized them. I've even performed a few marriages. I wasn't trying to be a marriage counselor. I assumed these guys knew what they were doing, and I just showed up when all else failed and we needed to split up the CD collection. However, I have my own methodology. It's what works for me, not for anyone else. People respond when they see vulnerability and when they see honesty. So when I mediate, I try to show people my vulnerability and honesty. I sit and talk to both sides independently of each other, trying to understand what kind of people they are, what they think is important, how they feel about the situation, what they want out of it, what they think of the other side. In general, I try to understand both sides of the conflict. I should note that senior partners have chided me more than once for using this terminology, but it's how I start working with clients, and that's fine with me. I just have to shut up when I use those words. I usually manage to find a way to get each side to think about what the other side thinks is important. For them, it may not be true, or it may be, and that is what is causing the conflict. Either way, it's important to get them to understand the other person's needs. Orson Scott Card, a famous science fiction author and religious fanatic, once wrote a story about a girl who could see the connections between people. She saw them as lines of power that created a web between everyone, and she could see how to cut those lines with a few well-chosen words. And another thing, how is it that some people can be monstrously smart, write incredible connected stories with interesting people and great dialogue, and then have this incredible blind spot in their lives where they believe in invisible people living above the clouds? I just can't understand that. When I read his story, I noted the similarities between what I do and what this fictional character does. I can't see what connects people, but if pushed hard enough, I can usually figure it out. And my job is to either untangle existing connections or create new ones that eliminate old ones. At least that's how I see it. It's really all just touchy-feely stuff, and it's not something I can pass on. And it's certainly not a skill I practice at home with my wife. Ah, yes, the wife. We haven't even mentioned her yet. I know this is a bit frivolous for an article in the Loving Wives section, but I need you to have an idea of what I do and how I do it, because it will matter later. Do I need to do self-description? Do I need to? Do I need to? When I read a story, the last thing I care about is what the guy looks like. Okay, I'm 5'10", right? My weight is 197 pounds. At least it was a week ago. I drink vodka, I like wine, I ride a bike, and yes, my hair is starting to thin and definitely graying on the sides. To hell with old age, isn't that enough? Do I need to go on and on about skin color? Or about the cleanliness of my shave? Or some other nonsense? Does anyone care about that? Do they? I'm fine. Oh God. So, the wife. Yeah, I should talk about her. The love of my life. I know everyone says that, right? But it's true. It's similar to what they say about children. How great you are to have them. Just words for those who never had them. I find the whole announcing you're having kids thing very interesting and a little funny. You say, "We're pregnant." And even that makes me smile. We are? I would just have a great time, and from that point on, everything is 100% hers. She would raise it, endure the discomfort, have to give up alcohol, pee a lot, and finally go through the humiliation of childbirth, not to mention the bodily problems that may arise afterward, from stretch marks to postpartum depression. And yet this guy is handing out cigars. Yeah, you got a lot going for you, asshole. What? And all your friends are telling you, go get drunk, you can't when the baby's born. Go to the movies, you can't when the baby's born. Go eat, you can't when the baby's born. Go to bed, you can't when the baby's born. And my personal favorite is, go have sex, you can't when the baby is born. And at the end, they throw in one phrase, but it will be the best thing in the world. Yeah, that sounds like it. That sounds like a great phrase. I mean, so many people say it, so they must mean it. But damn, you get all kinds of very explicit and specific reasons why it's going to suck. And then you're told at the end, but it's great, the best thing ever. And I can't help but notice that there's no specificity in that. But given how I feel, relate, to Christy, I can well believe that. That's her name, by the way. Was Christy Fenton, and now Christy Absalom? At least that's what it's going to be for the next couple months. At least that's how I felt about Christy, and that's how she felt about me. When it came to kids, I realized that my jokes at the party about it were both true and coming from the dark. For us, the prospect of having children didn't make sense. During her first menstruation, Christy felt intense pain and girl problems, as she put it. Her parents took her to the hospital and discovered that her tubes were misshapen. Surgery was required. They were tied, and the ovarian parts of her tubes were removed because otherwise her periods would have been excruciating at best and life-threatening at worst. Apparently, she was told it was cancer just waiting to happen. So they were removed, and with them any chance Christy had of having children. By the time we were together, she had come to terms with it, or as much as is even possible for a woman. As far as I'm concerned, a woman doesn't consider herself a woman if she can't fulfill one of the most basic feminine functions. I don't know if I believe that, but in Christy's case, I knew it was a dark maelstrom that neither of us wanted to look too deeply into. That was fine with me. I loved children and assumed they were definitely in my future. But when faced with the choice between Christy and children, I decided I was out of options. We talked about it a lot, and a few years ago, Christy even said we should get donor eggs, combine them with my sperm, and do a surrogate pregnancy. We looked into that option. I got tested. It turned out I was fine with swimming, and even started researching surrogates and the procedure itself. But I was never really sure about it. Something wasn't right. Christy was enthusiastic, but when it came time to do it, I just couldn't do it. I don't know why, but something was wrong. It wasn't until Christy fainted and I refused that I realized what was wrong. Christy had an unfounded sense of guilt about not being able to have children, and the whole surrogacy thing was both an attempt to make me happy and what she thought was her punishment from God. I have no idea where it all came from, but it was there, and it took some therapy to pull it all together and start rebuilding. But you do what you have to do. I knew something was wrong, and my subconscious seemed to know more than my conscious mind. And if it wasn't wrong then, it failed me rather dramatically in this case. So there were no children. We never adopted children. That didn't seem right either, though I have no idea why. And we decided that if we had to be childless, we should accept it. We traveled, saw the world, ran with bulls, ate breakfast at the foot of the pyramids, played hide-and-seek in the ruins of Pompeii, snorkeled at Pearl Harbor, drank ourselves into oblivion for weeks tasting wine in Napa Valley, and jumped off a bridge in Sydney Harbor. We lived life. Longtime friends drifted apart when they had kids. They had different lives than we did, and we all knew it. We often said, we should get together. And at first, we tried. But no one was available. No one could find a babysitter. And if they could, they had to be home by 11 and couldn't even load up properly because they had to be sober to be responsible for their kids when they got home. As they walked out of our apartment in downtown Bellevue, an affluent suburb of Seattle, we looked at each other, giggled, and said, "Good thing we don't have kids." It was all a bit pathetic, and we were clearly covering our emptiness, but we were also drunk, and then having slow, lazy sex on the balcony. We were 3 stories high, so we weren't worried about being seen, and that had its perks. We were doing well. I had my own job, sometimes very stressful, and she had her own. She was the curator of a technology museum in Seattle. It was funny. She was into all the little gadgets like iPhones, iPads, Fitbits, and other things traditionally considered masculine. And I loved classical music, sculpture, and opera. We often joked that we had switched parts of our brains, like that episode of Star Trek, the original series, of course. I was enlightened on this point by my sometimes nerdy wife, Fear Not. We've been married for almost 12 years now. We met at a lawn hockey game. I had just moved to Seattle from college in Missouri, and before that from the Chicago suburbs where I grew up. I didn't know many people, and someone from work invited me to visit, and I honestly didn't have much to do that Saturday. 2 teams of 2 players pounced on each other. The level of violence was amazing. As far as I could tell, it was a great excuse for the women on both teams to beat the crap out of the men on the field, and to be applauded for it. Sometimes it was hard to tell which were the women and which were the men. The women were so put on makeup and perfumed. And I was just watching one man get hit so hard on the shin with a club that his shin split open and there was blood everywhere. And then I noticed someone next to me holding a glass of something and looking at what was happening in front of her. "Do you think he'll ever want to be on the overall team again?" she asked, looking at me. I know he wouldn't want to. Limping home isn't the way to finish something. I said somewhat unconvincingly. She smiled at me, looked back at the man being led off the field, supported by two teammates, and said, "Oh, I can think of a way to get into a situation like that, and that would be fun." But it wasn't. It was nice to hang out. She nodded and walked away. It was electric for me. Christy was 6 feet tall, hair brown but streaked with blonde, a slightly round face, beautiful eyes, accentuated by dark makeup and long lashes, also real as I found out later. A proportionately upturned nose, stunning cheekbones, and a round, plump mouth that, if you focused on it, made you want to kiss it. Her eyes were incredibly blue and she blinked far too often. She had perfect proportions. Nothing too big, nothing too small. Her ass was shaped but not huge or jiggly. Slightly narrow hips, but overall just a delightful figure. I watched her walk away and almost kicked myself for clumsy responses, shaking my head sorrowfully. Another opportunity came later when I visited a temporary bar set up next to the field. There they sold only cheap, crappy wine and beer and prepared cocktails that tasted great. I bought a glass of the least offensive wine. Yes, I'm a snob. I'm adept at wine tasting. My mom's sister, Aunt Nancy, used to review wines part-time, and I learned a lot from her, nose, bouquet, and all the other nonsense that goes along with reviewing. I also learned that 95% of it is all bullshit done to impress other people who have no clue about anything. At the end of the day, wine, like art, is about what works for you and what doesn't. There is nothing in the world that makes wine worth $100, let alone $1,000, except your willingness to pay for it. After buying the one thing that didn't make me cringe, I turned to leave, but found this delightful creature who had spoken to me earlier standing behind me in line, fiddling with some small black box with something that looked like a pen attached to it. She was so focused on it that she didn't notice me standing there, waiting patiently for her to notice me and move out of the way. Eventually, I cleared my throat. She looked up with some irritation, realized the situation, and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I just got this and I can't stop playing with it." She picked up the box, which had some sort of gray LCD screen on it. "This is a visor, one of the new PDAs," she said, as if that explained everything. I just looked at her, and she said, "Never mind. Excuse me, let me get out of your way." She ducked down, I walked around her, and then just stopped. She took the drink, turned around, and now I was in her way. She just stared at me, a smile playing on her lips. "We should stop meeting like this," she said with mock seriousness. I smiled back. "So what's a visor? Let's get out of line and go talk." And so we did. Over the course of an hour, I learned that Visor is one of those new digital personal assistants that Palm pioneered. I learned that she's a gadget geek. I learned that she is a librarian and historian by training. I learned that she only came because her friend is playing and she can't figure out how to turn him down without hurting his feelings. And I learned that she's free next Friday and really wants to see the latest Harry Potter movie, but hates going alone. The hint was heavy and damn it, I got it. And that was a start. 4 weeks later, we were in the same bed, and another 10 months later, we were married. I could go on at length about the chaotic wedding. All my relatives showed up, and it was like a Clampett reunion. Her relatives were there too, much higher class than us. They eyed us through their bifocal glasses with suspicion, and then cheered when someone from my side spotted them and pulled them into the fray. I could go on for a long time about her family. One sister, a brother in the army doing God knows what, God knows where, and God knows with whom. A father and mother, long divorced but now friends. I had only met her brother a few times as he was out of the country a lot, but he seemed like a decent enough guy. He was concerned about his sister, but wasn't blind to who she was. We had a beer or 10. These army guys know a thing or two about drinking. And had a few, well, I'd call them interesting, conversations. I learned a lot more about her first boyfriends than I wanted to. I could go on for a long time about our years together. We grew up together, had fun, explored life, and generally acted like teenagers when we thought we could get away with it. We were partners in every sense of the word. We attended some clubs together, I'd read poetry, and she'd come in and try things out. She would draw, and to be honest, I didn't even try. I could read and write, but that was the end of my abilities. I didn't even know which end of the brush to paint with. I'd try to do abstractions, and she'd come in and look and make remarks like, "I see you're still 7 years old." And then she'd laugh hysterically. Oh, she did her own spells, my wife. We both had modern mountain bikes and used them extensively. There are plenty of bike paths in the Seattle area, and we made the most of them. It was our primary physical activity, and we loved it. We even took weekend bike rides to Portland and Vancouver. I don't want to make it sound like hippie nirvana. We fought. We had disagreements. God, that woman had such a temper. When she was furious, she could turn any room into Siberia. She had a vicious sense of sarcasm that pierced to the core, and when she got really angry, she did it right in front of other people, and my only option was to either back down and look weak or have a cat fight in front of our friends. I tried both options, but neither worked. If I backed down, it solved the problem faster, but I looked disgraceful in front of our friends, and if I fought her, I kept my pride but made our new refrigerator, the bed, last a lot longer. She knew exactly what she was doing. It was weird because to everyone else, she was an absolute delight. Even if she didn't like the people we were with, and she could be sarcastic about certain acquaintances in our social circles, she was so polite and excruciatingly nice to them. It was only with me that she showed her great displeasure when she felt it necessary. In a way, I felt I had a huge advantage. I was the only one she felt comfortable enough with to take off her mask. That's a compliment. On the other hand, sometimes I seriously worried about her mental health. But what pissed her off the most was my attempt to apply my damn Jedi mind tricks to her. Apparently, when I go into mediator mode, as she put it, I unconsciously adopt a certain posture and facial expression. She realized very early on what that looked like, and it was one thing that, no matter what we were arguing about, was guaranteed to elevate the situation a level or two. It was at times like this that the inevitable taunts like, "Your family sucks too," came into play. There was no argument that couldn't be escalated by involving family. She also realized that it wasn't worth bringing my mother into it. The weekend I spent in a motel because I kicked her out was proof of that. Although, to be fair, it's worth noting that it wasn't that she often had nothing to yell about. I am now not easy to live with. I'm moody. I can lose my temper over nothing. Never ride with me when I'm having a bad day. I tend to look down on stupid people, and we're all stupid at one time or another. And I've been known to enjoy the occasional strip club, even knowing what it represents in terms of exploiting women. Like her, I was capable of provoking an unpleasant situation, though I preferred to deal with it behind closed doors. She knew when she had crossed the line. She realized it pretty quickly once her fervor subsided, and I often got a lot of apologies, and the next week I had trouble even getting up in the morning. I should tell you a little bit about our sex life. It was amazing. Well, at least I thought it was. In the bedroom, we were just a perfect couple. Or in the living room, or even in the back seat of a car one night in Victoria, Canada. We explored each other. We were honest about our fantasies. At least I was. Turns out she wasn't, not completely. We did risky things, going out to dinner with her without underwear and in a short mini dress, never knowing who she was flashing, that sort of thing. We played around a couple times when I picked her up at the motel bar, until one night some guy was hitting on her and wanted her to say no, and I had to explain the facts of life to him by holding his balls through his suit pants, and we never did that again. Again, I never did that. With what I know now, hell knows, maybe she did. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have sworn. Sometimes life gets the best of you, you know? Sometimes you're a windshield and sometimes you're a bug. Despite all that, we were happy. At least I thought we were. We were. My job was sometimes demanding and I had to travel in some situations. I was an employee of my company, and to some extent I had to travel to wherever the work was. But it never lasted long, and I would end up back home again. And that didn't happen very often. Christy sometimes went to some tech company that wanted to donate old equipment to its museum for posterity. And I managed to go there a couple of times too, though sitting around watching a bunch of bearded men talk about how a hard drive the size of a washing machine used to cost $750,000, and now you could buy earrings with more capacity than that, wasn't my idea of a good time. But I was playing golf in Arizona, in the middle of winter, at Intel's expense, playing nickel slots and doing nasty things to my wife on hotel property, so what the hell do I care? So back to the night I was talking about, which is actually what this story will be about. I walked into our apartment looking great, threw my jacket on a chair and shouted, "I'm home! What are we having for dinner?" The lights were on, and I knew she was home. I parked next to her little Mazda Miata MX-5 convertible in the parking lot below the house. The entrance to our apartment was in the kitchen. I busied myself grabbing a beer, low-calorie diet beer as she called it, and wandered into the living room. She was already sitting on the couch, clutching her knees, looking at me and nibbling her lip. But it wasn't her that stopped my movement. It was the guy sitting next to her. "Honey," she said weakly. I stopped and stared at her, not believing what I was seeing. Her body language expressed remorse, frustration, nervousness, and resilience, all in the same pose. It's impossible to live with someone as close as we've lived for so many years and not realize what you're seeing. Well, apparently you can, as I discovered. But both then and now, I could read the whole situation like the palm of my hand. The guy was young, with a smile playing across his face that was on the other side of non-confrontational. Not a smirk, but definitely from the same family. A cousin, perhaps. It was a classic arrogance that hid some sensitivity on his part. Hell, for all I knew, he might have even believed it, but the body language was a classic demonstration of obsession and the need to capture it in later events. It was clear to me without words that he was the alpha male here, in terms of possessing her. She leaned forward and he leaned back, both arms spread out at the sides of the couch, one behind her back. It was obvious that she was leaning forward a little so it wouldn't appear that he was hugging her. But Einstein didn't immediately realize that she wasn't pulling him away. She was trying hard not to show it, but the harder she tried, the worse she looked. Right now, she looked more guilty than remorseful. Just looking at the two of them made me realize what was going on, at least partially. I knew what was going on. I didn't know what they were getting at. Whether it was a confession and a promise not to do it again, or a Dear John moment or something else, but I knew what had happened before that. It's impossible not to know when you see something like that. I stared at them for another moment, then plopped into the chair next to the couch, at right angles to it. That's how I ended up next to this guy, who was looking at me with what I thought was concern. I saw Christy frown as she watched me sit down, and I read the look on her face. Their seating arrangement was really unfortunate. If I started raging, she wouldn't be able to stop me. But it was too late now. They were clearly playing to some script, and I had to hold back the anger building in my stomach to figure out what that script was. I sipped my beer, sighed, and took a long sip. She bit her lip again, and I could see that she was about to say something but didn't. I assumed it would be something like, "Yeah, a beer would be nice right now." I grinned as a thought occurred to me. It's funny how you react to sudden stress. I've seen it before, and it's always puzzled me. People say the most ridiculous things, make some remark or bring up some issue that has absolutely nothing to do with the current situation. This happens quite often in my job, and I've always quietly wondered what exactly is going through their heads at that moment. Presumably, it's a complete denial of the reality of the situation, and here I am feeling it myself. "What?" Christy asked, a note of irritation in her voice that she immediately hid. I took another sip of my beer and then said, "I was just wondering, I know you so well. I can read your body language. I just thought, you can't hide your body language in a situation like this, not when you know it so well." And then it occurred to me that's exactly what you did, didn't it? I had no idea. She wrinkled her nose slightly, then sighed. "Well, yeah, I guess I did, but that's partly the point of this intervention." "Intervention?" I interjected, sarcasm evident in the word. "Is that what you're calling this little event? Why not think of something more pleasant? Maybe get together? Come to Jesus?" He lashed out before I could stop him. "I shouldn't have. I'm usually better than this." "Mike," she said reproachfully, using that two-tone way people use to verbally emphasize a two-syllable word. "Of course, dear wife," I said, emphasizing the word wife. "Go ahead. I wouldn't want to disturb your script." I glanced at the guy sitting next to her and noticed one of my beers open in front of him. The white-hot rage I was feeling, really starting to feel, became an inch whiter. "Mike, you said it yourself. You didn't notice anything. I think it's fair to say that, in fact, not only did you not notice, but there was nothing to notice, right? No signs, no decrease in affection or sex, right?" She was right. I hadn't noticed. I hadn't looked closely, but implicit trust does its job. Still, I'm an observant guy. My job depends on it, and I don't take it for granted. Even after 11 years, I still bought her flowers for no reason. Sent them to her at work, picked her up on weekends, bought her little trinkets, anything to show her how much I cared about her. From my point of view, it was even more disgusting. My mind was racing at 320 miles per hour, asking questions I had no answers to. Had I not given her enough? What more could she possibly want? What motivated her to do this? Why? I have a hard time controlling my emotions. I will never get answers to my questions if I snap, being very tempted. I was smart enough to realize it would happen at some point, but I needed answers first, and this was the way to get them. I wouldn't get them all, and she would blatantly lie to me about some of them. It was inevitable. I knew she still loved me and didn't want to hurt me any more than she had to, so I knew she would lie about what she thought was right. It was the human thing to do. But that's the thing. I knew she loved me. I was 100% sure of it. Even when there was evidence of that love all around, I was still sure of it. Maybe I was fooling myself, but I don't know. In life, you just know some things, and I knew she loved me. I think I was just kidding myself about the against everything else part of the sentence that was supposed to follow that. I was just gesturing with my beer, not yet trusting my words. Christy took that as confirmation and continued in the most measured voice she was capable of. Logically, if I've never given you less than you've always gotten from me, how does that affect you? I'm still the same person I've always been. And this, she gestured at the man sitting next to her, is just an extra dimension, that's all. Nothing changes. I will still and always love you and be everything to you that I've always been. And I want the same in return. Surely you can see that. You haven't lost anything. That's how it went down. She was actively hoping I would go for it, see it from her point of view. It was a clever thing to do. She was trying to do to me what I do professionally. Make me see it from her point of view. Metaphorically, resemble her shoes. There was silence for a moment. Then she said, "It's not you, honey. Absolutely not. You are completely missed. Please understand that. I admire you and always will. I just—" "What exactly, Christy?" I said, surprised I hadn't knocked over the coffee table or maimed someone yet. "You just wanted more than I could give? Flowers, gifts, weekends away, love." I grinned at the last word. "You just couldn't get enough?" Christy's reserve began to falter, her voice and face trembling. Tears came to her eyes. The guy sitting next to her leaned forward with a concerned expression and looked at me in disgust. "Christy," he said in a surprisingly deep voice, "baby, it's okay. Hang in there, just like we talked about." His arm resting on the back of the couch reached forward and wrapped around her body. Then I relaxed a little. I leaned forward and said, "Hey, asshole, I can call you Dick, right? We're practically siblings, aren't we?" With that, I put my hand on his back, which was still resting in his lap. In one smooth motion, I grabbed his index finger and simply pulled it up and back. He had no choice but to go for it, or he risked breaking it. Since his arm was wrapped around Christy, he had nowhere to go. And when I lifted my finger and started pressing harder, bending it at an angle, he arched out to release the pressure. He couldn't move as he was trapped with his hand behind Christy's back. "Mike, please," Christy said helplessly. I threw a very quick venomous glance in her direction. "Listen, asshole, this is my wife. No matter what you think to yourself, she's still my wife." I put special emphasis on that word, sticking my finger out even more. "That's my couch you're sitting on, in my apartment, drinking my beer. And frankly, shit with brains. I'm not impressed with your desire to be a white knight. You're here because this whore," Christy groaned slightly at those words, "wants you here, but I don't want you here. So shut up, and don't say a word or more bad things will happen. I'm holding your ass, and I'm using 4 fingers on one hand to do it. Don't piss me off any more than you already are, or more bad things will happen to you. Understand?" He nodded somewhat dejectedly, let go of my finger and sat up, taking his hand away from Christy, rubbing his injured finger vigorously and looking at me with narrowed eyes. I kept my gaze on him. "Not a word, asshole. Remember that." I shifted my gaze to Christy, who paled even more, but then pulled herself together. "Mike, that wasn't necessary. James wasn't trying to hurt you. He just came for me. To show support. To let you know he's not a threat." "Really? How good for him. But he'd better shut up anyway. I'm not going to hit you, but by God, I feel like hitting someone right now and he's here." "Mike, please. Please understand, we didn't choose this. It just happened. What happened, Christy? Did you trip and fall on it? I'd read that phrase in several stories, and it just came out. She sighed. No, nothing like that. We were just working together, and it just happened. I'm really sorry about that. I don't know what to say. I love two men. I love you. I always have, and I always will. But I love James, too. I can't explain it. It's not the same. There are parts, but I love you both in slightly different ways. Please try to understand. I sipped another beer, mulling over my answer. I set the beer aside and simply said, "Bullshit." She wrinkled her nose. No, it isn't. You know I love you. You can't doubt that. I've never shown you anything but attention and love, and you know it. Even when... She hesitated, then continued. When other things were happening, I was sure that you would never get less than completely from me. And that will never change. She stared at me intently, as if she wanted me to challenge that judgment. She had already expressed herself in this way, which meant it would continue to be so. Classic leader wording. You make it sound like the situation is already in place. People have come to believe in it, and have started looking for ways to adjust it to their reality. Not today, Christy, I thought. The thing is, what I do, all this vulnerability, bringing people together with common themes, playing on their sense of importance and fair play, while it can work wonders in bringing people together, in skillful hands it can lead to the exact opposite result. I don't do that, or at least I try not to. While I can see what binds people together, I can just as easily tear them apart. It's like a massage therapist. They know where the nerve nodes are and can, if they really want to, cause as much pain as they soothe. With their hands on your body, I can do the same thing. But I really don't like having that ability. When you're angry, you can actually destroy someone. And that's when I got angry. Really angry. She needed to know my pain. She needed to know she caused it. She needed to know the reality of her future. And I was going to destroy that future. All with words. Right then and there. Looking back, I'm partly ashamed of what I did and partly proud that I stood my ground and didn't give up. What I did was not good. But on the other hand, what was the alternative? I wasn't going to give her what she wanted because it wasn't what I wanted. Not at all. It was the exact opposite of what I wanted. There was just no middle ground, at least in my mind. If we had decided to open our marriage together, then that's one thing. But we didn't, and I would never have decided to do that. I was a one-woman man. So what she wanted was, by definition, the opposite of what I wanted. What she wanted, I couldn't give her. And by having that asshole sitting next to her and the way she was acting, she was making it clear that that was all she could take. I wasn't going to give it to her, so by the rules of my profession, it was all over except for the CD collection section. I tilted my head in her direction. I knew she appreciated it. I knew how hard it was for her, how she was struggling with the need to do this. I knew it would be hard for her to look at herself in the mirror after this day. It was time to take offense. What if I say no? What if I say I won't live like this, Christy? That I don't share it, and you shouldn't either? What about the vows we made? Don't they mean anything? She had the decency to look away. I understand your anger, Mike. I'd have the same thing. But I'm here to help you deal with it. Look, this has been going on for a long time. You never knew. Now you do, because I respect you and I think you should know. I don't know what's going to happen here, but I know what I want. I think you can live with that. I think you can. What we have is too big not to. You know that. You know we're both better together than apart. And this, doesn't affect us. I don't know how to make you understand that. It's like a second job or something. She had no idea about my anger. She had all the classic symptoms of someone who has discarded the concept of understanding negative reactions because there just wasn't a way to deal with it or recognize that you were causing it. Most people do exactly that. When they do something wrong or unpleasant, they just don't pay attention to the number of reactions because otherwise it would really signal that what they did was seriously wrong. And nobody wants that because then they'd have to do something about it. I snorted and said, "You really believe that, don't you? How is this supposed to work, Christy? How are you going to soothe my ego? How are you going to make it all better?" She blinked, but to her credit, perked up. "I don't. You were supposed to tell me. Everything you wanted to." "Okay, no problem. Tell that asshole you've had enough and to get out of here immediately. And have him lose your number." I leaned forward and looked her in the eye. "That's what I want, Christy. Do it." She stared at me for a second, then looked away. Nothing then? I inquired icily. There was silence for a moment. I heard the grandfather clock on the wall that her mom had given us for our 10th wedding anniversary beating out the minutes. Mike, why can't you understand? Nothing has to change. We're doing this here and now because I'm not going to run behind your back. It's killing me. Holding the front. I have to be free, and you want me to be free, don't you? And I respect you for what you need to know. Understand? Except, I finished for her. She nodded, a tear appearing in the corner of her eye. How long have we been married, Christy? I asked sharply. 11 years, she answered uncertainly. That's right. And in all that time, have I ever once let you know that I'm okay with it? That I'd put up with it? That I would put up with this kind of thing and accept it? She looked away again. Another point in favor of Mike's team. She insulted my intelligence and her knowledge of me. A willful disregard for reality. No, she said quietly, then averted her gaze. But you can. I know you can. Our lives are based on pure love for each other. If you loved me, if you really loved me, you would let me do this. Really? Pure love? Is that how you show it? By falling in love with someone else? That's what unfiltered love is? Jesus, what in your world is unfiltered hate? Killing me first? That's not fair, Mike. I didn't plan this. No one wants to hurt you. Well, good damn luck to you. You've got it anyway. I'm sorry. Me too. It's no big deal, right? I took another sip of my beer. I didn't taste anything. It was just cold and wet at this point. I pondered my next gambit. I knew it would be hard for her to come to me. That's why she brought her ass with her. There was no other way she could have handled it. But she had no idea of the depth of my pain. Hell, even I had no idea. Christy, how do you think I feel right now? I asked quietly. She looked at James sitting next to her. He nodded at her, encouraging her. I think you must be in pain. Angry. Angry at me. For doing this to us. To you. But you don't understand. It's not what you think. It's what you're afraid of. It's going to be okay. We can work it out. I still love you and I always will. I need you to understand that if that's all you understand. I love you. You. I will always love you. I will always be yours. And you'll be mine. We just have to get through this. Adjust a little. And we'll be together forever. Lobsters, remember? She was referring to the episode of Friends we'd been watching. We both liked the idea of an old lobster couple, and we even dressed up in lobster costumes for Halloween that year. I don't think you're guessing. I really don't guess. You ripped my heart out, you know that? Everything I thought we were based on turned out to be a lie. Pain burst out of me, fresh and smoky. No, it's not, Christy interrupted me. That's just the point. It isn't. I'm still the same person. You're still the same person. It's still the same marriage. There's just a different dimension. A new axis. You have to understand that. Nothing changes. You should have known that, that's all. Why, Christy? Why did I have to know? Why couldn't you just keep sneaking around? I was willing to look away for a moment as I really wanted to pay attention to her. She looked a little taken aback. Would you really prefer that I continue to sneak around? No, that's not what I said. I asked why I should know. Because it was killing me, she said a little confused, not sure what I was getting at. I was naughty and tried my best to be the way I always was at home, and it wasn't fair to you. Okay, so you've been naughty. Why? Why was it killing you? Well, because it was, she mumbled, realizing what I was getting at. Wrong? I added. She just looked at me. The reason you were sneaking around is because you knew it was wrong and that I would be outraged, upset, hurt, angry, and everything else if I found out. You knew you were behaving badly and destructively, and that's why you were sneaking around. You hid your bad behavior because you knew it was wrong. There was silence for a moment. Then she said, we just had to find a way to tell you to lessen the pain. How are you doing? What do you have to say? I asked in response, pursing my lips sarcastically. She didn't answer anything. But still, you have no idea how I feel right now. Everything you've said is just words. Oh, I'm sure it's hard for you. It's so hard. It's bloody hard. None of you are giving up on anything, are you? Just good old Mike. I'm the one who has to put up with it, but for you, it's a done deal. You ain't lost nothing. All you got is to have your cake and eat it. And Dick Drip, well, I don't know what he has to lose. I suspect nothing. He gets you without any guilt or meanness. Wow. He looked at me and was about to say something, but I glared at him, looked at his finger, and set the beer aside as if preparing for something. Obviously, he changed his mind. Mike, James wants me all the time and so do you. I'm trying to do the best I can. Just leave me alone. I told him just like I told you that he can't have me like he can have you. I have 2 men to take care of now, and I'm not denying you anything. You're just an idiot, Christy. Listen to yourself. Doesn't change me? Screw that. Of course you're changing. The very fact that we're having this conversation means that I'm not changing, as you so charmingly put it. I no longer understand you exclusively, which, I'll note, is not at all what I signed up for when we exchanged marriage vows. And neither did you. The best thing you can do is to drop that bastard's ass right now, and quite frankly, throw yourself at my mercy. And that's it. I ain't sharing nothing. Stop asking. You should know better. But you have no idea how much pain I'm in. I want you to imagine that I had an affair, that I had sex with that pretty redhead paralegal. Imagine that, Christy. Imagine that I just came home and told you that I've been in love with her for months and I want to continue. I looked at her and realized my words had flown in one ear and out the other. She was too absorbed in her situation to make sense of my words. Then she opened her mouth and confirmed it. Well, I wouldn't like it much, but I'd find a way to deal with it. Bullshit. That's just the way it is. The only reason you say that is because it's a situation you want me to accept. Let's be honest. Oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked that, should I? That was the end of it. Even she had to admit the honesty of that statement. You destroyed me, Christy. You destroyed us. Don't you realize that? I don't care what you say about things not changing. It is. And there's no getting away from it. No matter what happens now, you will always betray me. Always. And nothing can change that. I'm never going to accept that, and I'm going to have to ask you to leave, since you clearly want it to continue. And even if you didn't, how the hell would I ever trust you again? You've kept this from me, and very effectively, for I don't know how many years. If you had said, okay, I'm done, then what? How would I have known you'd decided to start over, with a laughing boy or someone else? How would I be able to trust you now, Christy? But you're not going to stop, are you? You want to. You just told me you want it. The phrase hit a nerve. It was obvious she didn't think so. The thing was, people who make deals with the devil never make them. You made your choice, and it's not me, right? Because if it was, all this shit would have been gone a long time ago. That's what I want, but you won't give it to me. Do you have any idea what that feels like, Christy? Do you? No, of course you don't. You just took everything I had to give, and then you took this asshole. And now you want to legitimize that choice. Well, it doesn't work that way. We've already made our choices. You can't make it again. I have no idea how my life will turn out next, but I can tell you this. I will not trust another woman as long as I live. You've already done that for me, Christy, so thank you for that. Just you. I don't know if I can ever get over what you've done and what you're trying to make me accept. I think it's unhealthy, but you're so blinded by the idea of getting everything in a short period of time that you truly believe you can have it all. And I'm the one who needs to be convinced. Screw you, honey. Life isn't like that. The reality is, you'll never know how much you hurt me today. Never? Until someone does it to you. But that's not going to happen, is it? Because you'll be too busy getting what you want. Oh, Mike. I'm so sorry. I don't want to hurt you. I really don't. Please, please. You don't have to feel this way. Tears streamed down her face. What am I supposed to feel, Christy? What you got from me wasn't enough, was it? What kind of feeling is it to take it out on the person you're supposed to love to the point of total destruction? Tell me? What am I supposed to feel? I don't even know what I did wrong or what you didn't understand, and there's no way you can be honest and tell me, is there? I mean, you haven't been honest until now, have you? There was silence. Christy opened her arms and hesitantly leaned forward, as if wanting to put her arms around me. I lifted my hand. No, thank you. The last thing I want from you is merciful love. I almost called her a bitch, but I needed to keep my cool. I didn't even notice the tears come to my eyes until I wiped them away. It was strange to be fighting rage and pain at the same time. It was a strange combination. Like you wanted to throw someone off a cliff, yet you held on to them and jumped yourself. Thoughts raced through her head, taking everything to its logical conclusion. She needed to somehow make sense of the devastation she had caused here. Like most people who had done something horrible, she didn't want to face it, trying to minimize it all and find a way to put it into words so it wouldn't sound so awful. She needed to do it because deep down she knew how bad it was and how devastating it would be, but she didn't want to face the feeling of responsibility. Once you confess, you have an obligation to do something about it. Once you confess, you have to undo the damage you've done, and she just didn't have the tools or the ability to do that. Some things can't be fixed. The more I could convince her of that, the more she would have to take responsibility. And I knew her ego couldn't take it. She would suffer forever, knowing that it was her own fault, and that she had no way to fix the situation. Christy whimpered some more, and the guy next to her hissed like he wanted to say something, but I looked at him, and he decided to refrain. There was a pause, then I asked, "So I can do this stuff too? Is it part of the master plan?" Christy looked up and frowned. I liked that frown. Her nose wrinkled and a crease appeared between her eyes. She replied, "I hope not. In a perfect world, it would be enough for you to just have me at your disposal. In the past, that has always been enough. But I realize I'm not good at judging or saying no, so I won't like it much, but I'll accept it. With reservations, of course." "With reservations?" I whispered. This woman was unreal. How the hell had I been married to her for 11 years and not seen this? What was I smoking and drinking? Was love really that blind? Was I really that stupid? Well, you don't have to fall in love. In you mean? Too easy. She frowned again. Another stab at it. C3, C4, and C5, please. Maybe I can get her battleship this time. No, I mean, this is different. If you want to test another woman, I wouldn't like it much, but like I said, I can't judge too harshly. I understand that. No, you have to be sure, as I am, that this is exactly the kind of relationship you want. A primary relationship, that you're mine and I'm yours. It's the way it's always been. I had to laugh. Except for the last, 3 months? The 6th? While you were here doing stuff with that clown Biffo? She sighed. It's not like that, Mike. I never stopped loving you. I just broadened my horizons, that's all. I like my horizons, thank you, I replied. She brightened, obviously taking that as my statement that I wasn't going to look for another woman. Great. Well, like I said, nothing changes for you and me. I love you just as much as I did before. Nothing changes. That statement alone made me mad, and that's when I realized that our relationship was over. Just as much as before. That is, almost as much as it allowed her to jump into bed with another man. And since she'd done it once, she'd do it again. And what do I get, Christy? A part-time wife? Is that how it's going to work? Part-time with me and part-time with Captain Hook? I said, nodding at James, who was still rubbing his finger. It's not going to be like that. We were thinking we could alternate time. 2 weeks with you, a few days with James. You're not home part of the time anyway. You never miss that time. You get most of the time, just like you do now. You were there first. I shook my head. And laughed the way you laugh when nothing is funny. You're just crazy, you know that? How could I have missed it all these years? She even smiled back at me and said, "Love is blind." True, I said dryly, in one of those tones one uses to say, the last word. I wondered again. I also wondered why I was even having this conversation in the first place, but it was probably one of the last conversations I'd have with her, so we needed to discuss things now. I was shocked at myself when I realized that this was exactly how I felt. But then upon reflection, I firmly decided that it was. "And this cockface here," I said, nodding at James, "is that okay with you?" He looked at her, then at me, smiled again, hesitated for a second, waiting for her confirmation, then nodded. I turned my attention back to Christy. "So it just happened, huh? Nothing was planned? You just fell in love? No planning or intentions?" At this point, I really wanted to give her the rope, and I wasn't disappointed. Yes, you have to believe me. I wasn't looking for that. I was happy. I'm still happy now, only even more so, except for this moment. The fact that you're hurting hurts me too. When you have to pay, huh? Too bad it's me paying and not you, huh, Christy? It's not easy for me either, Mike. I know how frustrated you must be, how angry you must be, but I know you're not such a bad person. I know you'll get through this. Oh, you know, don't you? You know I can just forget about it, don't you? She turned away, and this time didn't look back. You want to know what I think, Christy? I said softly. She looked at me again, her eyes widening with concern. Then she nodded hesitantly. Okay, I think it's total bullshit, from start to finish. I think all this protesting that it just happened is bullshit, and right now it's dripping on my shoes. You can't just fall in love like that, Christy. You know that. It's an effort of will. You have to do all those little things along the way, spending time together, looking for each other, letting the other person know you're interested in them, the jokes that no one understands, the little looks and touches, the personal and intimate things. That's how you fall in love. And you don't do it unconsciously. You make a conscious choice to do it. At least it's a conscious choice not to stop yourself from doing it. You know that. I know it. Even this damn face knows it. This was a direct attack on who Christy thought she was. She did consider herself moral and ethical in making the right choices. I realized that for her, as for many other people, the statement "it just happened" is just an excuse. It's what people do who don't want to admit they are guilty of doing things that deep down they think are wrong. Whether they can stop is another matter, so it happens every day that people do things they know are wrong, but do them anyway because they lack the moral fortitude to just say no. This is especially difficult when it comes to forbidden fruit. The mind will come up with all sorts of reasons why they did what they did to make it acceptable to themselves, but ultimately most conscious people know what is right and what is wrong. They just do their best not to look at it directly. In my work as a mediator, you never draw attention to these situations. Trying to get a person to evaluate their bad behavior and admit it is not the way to get a good outcome. One of two things always happens. Either the person accepts it and puts up with it, trying to integrate it into their self-esteem, and coming up with increasingly ridiculous reasons to explain the behavior, or they don't accept it and argue vehemently against it, to the point of pushing themselves into a logical and emotional corner. And when that happens, they begin to fight back, often in anger. That's when anger and sabotage come into play. And again, no one wins. There are times when you can get through to someone, but it usually takes someone they absolutely respect, the right words at the right time, and it's too easy to make a mistake. And if they are in deep denial, as I observed in this case, well, you might as well fart in a hurricane. In Christy's case, she was smart enough to know it was wrong, and she knew I wasn't wrong in what I said. It would have been very difficult for her to come to terms with that reality if it had been pointed out to her. I was doing the same thing I'd tried to do before, pointing out her responsibility for how I felt. With limited success, I thought. But that was okay. Getting someone to realize what they've done is a long process that they have to come to on their own. Almost no one realizes the first time. They have to get over it over time, on their own. You may not have meant to do it, but you didn't prevent it, did you? It's a betrayal, Christy. Every act here is emotional betrayal, even before it turned into a dirty little party, and you know it. More light was shed on the subject. I knew she'd be thinking about it for days. Next step. So your excuse is that I lacked nothing? That's it? Just a look in response. She was starting to realize what I was doing, and she was scared. Words can be a powerful thing if you know how to use them, and she knew I knew. I see. So it never once occurred to you that if you have all that love left for your numb thumb, then by definition you're not giving it to me? You have somehow established some localized amount of love that I must receive, and whatever is left over you can give as you see fit, haven't you? She replied, You can love your children and still love your spouse. Did your mother love you less because you had 6 children? This was unexpected. She fought back. The thought occurred to me that they were coaching each other. They were trying to prevent some of my inevitable arguments. In a way, one could admire their planning. Embarrassed. Oh yes, that's true. And while you're on the subject, yes, I didn't get my share. At all. And you know that. But we're not talking about kids, are we, Christy? We're talking about marriage. I spit out the last word and she flinched. Good. I'm so glad you were able to put a figure on how much I should be getting. Please write an article about it. I'm sure many other couples would like to know what that figure is. That's enough for him to overlook the shortfall, isn't it? Another hard look, a pale face around her eyes. She was well aware that I was about to destroy her. I asked, "What do you think your sister would say to that? Have you thought about it at all? Just curious." Christy raised her head and jutted her jaw out, a sure sign that she was going the stubborn route. "I think they won't approve, but if I explain to them that I didn't want this, but it just so happens that I want to be happy and this is my way to do it, they'll understand. You know they want the best for me." It was the truth. That's just the way it was. Although I don't think Christy realized that they had no illusions about what she was willing to do to get her way. On our wedding day, I was personally talked to by her brother. He advised me to not put up with her crap. She's hot, but she burns out quickly. Stand your ground and she'll come to her senses. He also explained that she harbors weird ideas, but when you confront them, just laugh at them and eventually she'll figure it out. I don't think she would have gotten the reception she was hoping for. Yes, I think you're wishful thinking. I think once you explain that, you screwed me. Which is exactly what you did. Let's not sugarcoat it. You were someone else's whore and then you came to my house and lied about it through your teeth, no offense. There's nothing you can do or say to change that. Then I guess they'll have something to say about it. How about you? Do you think your brother would approve or understand, Christy? I put quotation marks around the words will approve and understand. She lowered her eyes, then raised them again and said quietly, "They'll understand. I know they will understand." Like you knew I'd find a way to accept it, huh? 0 to 2 so far, baby. Not a good outcome. She sobbed and rubbed her eyes. I wasn't about to give up, though. You know, even after I ask you to leave, you're still going to date that shit. I glanced at James, who was looking at me with hatred on his face. Even he realized what I was doing. Leave, she muttered weakly. After all, you do love him, right? That's what you said, right? And when I say leave, where will you go? Don't tell me you didn't plan this. I know I didn't. You're not stupid. You knew there was a chance I'd say no, and with the way things have been so far, you couldn't say no, so you're going. Have you moved some of your stuff in with him yet? I'd look, but I don't want to get up. Her voice came from very far away. We thought... I thought you might need some time to come to terms with the new... She stammered, trying to start a new topic, ignoring the one she didn't want to answer. I'm not going to give up, even if you make me leave. You're mine and I'm yours. I'll always be by your side. You know that. This was getting more and more interesting. She was doing her best to fight me on my turf, tried to play on my own emotional connections. She knew I would always find the best solution in my professional life, and she was sure she was offering me the best solution here. So you plan to live with a man who willingly and knowingly pursues another man's wife, with a man who has no respect for other people's relationships, with a man of such outstanding quality that he sits on my couch, drinks my beer, and claims another man's wife. That's the man? That's who you're associating your emotional life with? That's your standards for today? Wow. She glanced at James, who shook his head in response and smiled in a don't listen to that guy kind of way. Babe, she whispered before I leaned forward. As menacingly as possible, in as low a voice as possible, I said, last warning, James, or they'll be calling you Jimmy One Ball. Got it? And he's tied himself to you too, I continued. A hardened con man. Once a cheater, he'll always be a cheater, right? Well, you deserve each other, that's for sure. And I'm sure it'll be great to start with. Lots of guilt-free sex, at least on your part. I doubt it'll be the same on his part. But when it gets boring, and you know it will, and it always does. What happens if he stays late at work? Or you? What will happen then? You both know what you're capable of with each other. How would things work out? Who, I wonder, would suspect who? She glanced at James again, who shook his head, smiled weakly, and made a that's garbage face. But the damage was done. Christy prided herself on her ability to read people. She prided herself on her ethics. The damage had already been done to them today, and she was smart enough to realize the truth of my statements. And worse, they were said now. It was out in the open. It couldn't just be ignored. When it happened, and we all knew it would be the first thing that came to mind. In an emotionally intense situation like this, how could it not be the first thing? Thus, the relationship was doomed before it even began. Now that suspicion was forced upon her, and it wasn't going to go away. In a way, their entire relationship had been built on this lie that was slowly getting to her, and now I noticed it. Christy turned and looked at me, eyes wide. She knew what I had said, and I knew it had penetrated her. Only superficially for now, but in time it would penetrate even deeper. She got away with it with me because I trusted her. She knew he could never love her, and I just emphasized that. Okay. Sighs. Another wound. I still wanted my pound of flesh. Then it was time for a coup de grace. I took another sip of beer, emptying the entire can this time. I even burped. It was done nonchalantly and came out at just the right moment. You know what? The one thing that really hit a nerve? More tears. In a situation where they had to explain a new reality to me, she said very little. Deep down, you are a very angry person. This incident, too, passed quickly. Whoever Christy thought she deeply believed that she was a good person. She had a saying, some people are good, they just did a bad thing. Almost no one was inherently evil. Most people got into bad situations and saw only one way out, or they were forced into them. I never really thought about it before, but just recently came to the conclusion that Christy was a liberal with a hot heart. She was the kind of person who never passes the buck. I, too, am a liberal. I believe in socialized medicine, care for all segments of the population, and all the rest. But I also believe in personal responsibility. You may have reasons for what you did, and I can sympathize with those reasons, but in my opinion, that doesn't absolve you of responsibility for what you actually did. You may not have had a girlfriend, women may have teased you, but that doesn't make it okay that you picked up a gun in a bar and shot cheerleaders. Nothing does. You did it for a reason, and those people are just as dead as they were 5 minutes ago. Just because I understand your reasons doesn't make those people suddenly alive again. She deeply believed that she was a good person who could do something bad, but that's okay because she would feel terrible about it later. The thing is, when someone you deeply love tells you these things, when you desperately don't want to believe it, but deep down you know it's true, it gets through your conscious defenses. You know it's true even if it's not actually true. I was one of the people she trusted most in the world, and I was declaring her evil, and clearly in earnest. And given that I had ridiculed her carefully constructed self-deception, she knew I had reason to believe it. Which meant she would almost certainly believe it too. It was the worst kind of self-deprecation when you were backed up by someone you valued and trusted. The fact that I had a vested interest in saying it was disregarded. I was counting on it. She'll believe it, and there's nothing stronger than the faith you instill in yourself. Well, good. Time to make her feel terrible. The thing is, Christy, every time you look at yourself in the mirror, you're going to remember this day. The things you said, the things you did, the things you undertook, the pain and identity destruction you caused, all because you didn't want to fall in love. Well, screw it. I don't buy it, and I don't buy it. The whole thing was an effort of will on your part. Why, I can't speculate, and I don't think you know either. But it doesn't matter. You did it, and this is the result. In a moment, I will ask you to leave, and if you know what is good for you, you will leave. Take with you the knowledge that you are an evil person, that everything you have done here has been evil incarnate, and realize that all of our friends and your family will know that. You know that I can explain it in a way that they will understand, and so will you. Think about it. Think about the results of your dastardly affair. You killed the one thing in your life you could have relied on, and you have no one to blame but yourself. You are, without a doubt, a truly evil person, one of the worst, who causes harm to others and then tries to minimize your responsibility for those actions by downplaying the damage done. Such a person, I hope, dies alone and in agony. If it were me, I would seek professional help. In this case, it's too late, but I'd probably want to know the reason so I wouldn't do it again. So go off with your serial adulterer in your arms and live happily ever after, constantly wondering where each other is, and I'll be sitting here, drinking myself to death and wondering why the hell I didn't do it. Hopefully, the sex will make up for everything you've lost. Now go away. I just sat there staring at her, and she stared back. She was about to say something but stopped, then whispered, "This is my home too." I lost my composure. I stood up as threateningly as I could and shouted, "Get the hell out, you damned whore!" and threw the empty beer can at the wall, where it shattered to pieces. Not quite the effect I was hoping for, but I was too pissed off to bother. She staggered back and James rose to his feet looking at my expression. Turning away, he lifted a visibly frightened Christy into his arms and dragged her toward the door. "Wait," I said, deciding to do one last thing. It occurred to me just that second, a fitting tribute to the evening. I approached and she recoiled from me. I grabbed her left hand and made her clench her fist into a flat palm. I pulled her wedding and engagement ring off her finger before she could stop me and stepped back looking at the rings. Then I took off mine as well and, gathering them in my fist, said, "Wait here." I made my way to the restroom by the front door, straight from the kitchen, and opened the door, leaving it open. Looking back at her ashy face, I lowered all the rings into the toilet tank and then, without looking at her, flushed the water. It seems appropriate. You let our marriage go down the drain, so the rings too. I knew this was going to hurt. She loved those rings. She'd spent 3 months looking for matching rings and had them made from metal recovered from her father's ring. I took no pleasure in the act, but it was symbolic, and in that moment I genuinely wanted to hurt her. I'm ashamed of it now, but I have to be honest about how I felt in that moment. She groaned at my actions, muttering, "No, no, 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 I didn't mean to," in a very thin voice. "And one more thing," said I, and with a "one more thing," I punched James right in the face. I applied a lot of force and his nose crunched under my fist. Blood rushed from everywhere and he fell to the floor. Christy looked at him, then at me. I rubbed my fist and gave her a disgruntled look. "You can go now. I'll change the locks tomorrow. Wait to be served." She finished. We were done. She knew it and I knew it. She wouldn't be able to look at herself in the mirror anymore without seeing that scene. She won't be able to look her friends in the face and will forever regret today's events, what led up to them, and what she did to our relationship and the person she thought she was. And in that moment, I had no sympathy for her. I had been abused. I had been betrayed. I had been set up as a cuckold. And damn it, I was furious and I was going to get my pound of flesh. It occurred to me that she might even do something drastic, but at that moment I was ashamed to admit that I didn't care. Again, hardly the right feeling to have at any time, but I was so devastated that at that moment I didn't care. I may seem like an asshole, but like I said, I'm not an easy person to live with because of moments like that. She knelt down next to him squirming, and I literally lifted him up by his hair. I opened the condo door and without saying a word, I pushed him outside, blood dripping onto the wooden floor, Christy following in shock, and when they were outside the door, I went back inside and slammed the door in their faces. I froze, staggered for a moment, then turned and strode back into the living room, grabbing the bottle of peach-flavored vodka that was on the kitchen table. I knew what I'd said, but I had no intention of drinking myself to death, although right now I needed a couple of healthy slugs to calm me down. Life is for winners, and by God, I wasn't going to be a victim, even though I really was. I just had to find a way out, and tomorrow would be another day. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.